Good evening. Lovely to be here with you guys and with the Happiness Planner that I absolutely love. And in this session, we're going to be talking about neuroscience. So essentially, this will be how to leverage our brain in terms of the neuroscience of stress. I know that the title was slightly different, but we're going to be taking a whistle-stop tour around the neuroscience of stress and what we need to know about our brain. But first, I'll introduce myself to you all. And I would also like to say, if you have any questions or any comments or anything, please pop them in the chat and we'll get started. So my name is Dr. Safia Debar. I'm a GP in London, and I have a special interest in neuroscience and neuroplasticity and stress management. And I run stress management workshops that are based on the Harvard model, where I certified. Now, this session is really about you. This session is really about starting now to understand what is happening in my brain. So what is happening in my neuroscience to explain why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, why I am thinking the way I'm thinking, and why I'm, my actions. So by empowering ourselves, by finding out how we work, our manuals, then we can leverage our brains to be able to do what we want, essentially. Now, let me just make sure that, right, so first of all, I would like to really have a look at what we understand by stress. And there are lots and lots of different examples of stress, and there are lots of definitions of stress. And you can't really speak to anybody without thinking, without somebody mentioning stress. So the best definition, or the definition that I use in my courses, and the definition I go by is, it is a non-specific response of our body, of our organism, to any demand. So you have a challenge, you then have a response. So it can be negative or positive. It can also, we refer to this as distress or eustress. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it can be real. So a real threat or a perceived stressor. Now, if prolonged, this can result in dis-ease. So really, it's not about demonizing stress. It's not about seeing stress as a bad thing. It really now is about knowing what our stress cycle is and how we can use it to leverage our brains. Now, some of the neuroscience. What I would like you to really, one of the basic concepts is, we need to think, what is my brain designed for? And usually in my groups, we discuss this, but essentially, we are designed for survival. And what is survival? It is our innate need to remain alive. So survival. And so you must think, okay, what do I need to survive? I need to be a hunt. I need to gain food. I need to do all the things that are related to survival. Secondly, it is perpetuation of the species. So that comes into food and reproduction. So when we analyze our behaviors, everything comes down to this goal, this main driver of our existence. So that's the first thing. So it's not necessarily for happiness or for fulfillment or for anything like that. It's survival. And this is primal. This is kind of ingrained in us. Now, I want you to remember that we have two main operating programs in our brain. We have something called the prefrontal cortex, which is around here, which is just behind just behind our forehead, and we have our limbic system, and we're going to be discussing these in a short time. But first, imagine you see this guy. So take a second and imagine yourself, you're just chilling, and then all of a sudden, a real, apparent danger is facing you. What is happening in your brain? So I will talk you through this cascade. The first thing is this limbic system, your threat signaling center, is switched on. That will send and initiate a beautifully orchestrated cascade of events, followed by neurotransmitters and chemicals to tell your organism that there is a threat. This is your fight, flight, freeze response. So you see him. Your limbic system is switched on. So what happens? Well, a branch of the nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system gets activated. And so this is now preparing your body to respond. So our senses are heightened. Our heart starts to beat faster. Our respiratory rate increases. Our heart is beating faster because we are trying to increase the oxygen. We are trying to increase our cardiac output because we are getting ready to move. Our respiratory rate increases because we need more oxygen. What happens to our gut? Well, we don't need to be digesting any food right now. We're facing him. So it switches off. What happens to our reproductive system? It switches off. What happens to our muscles? They tense up because we are getting ready to move. What happens to our sugar stores? They are released into our bloodstream to enable us to have the energy to fight or to run, to flee. Now, what happens to our mind? What happens to our thoughts? Where they become, well, our survival instinct is triggered, so they become negative, catastrophic. Oh my God, what if I'm gonna die? What if, so I need to act. So our immune system, what happens to our immune system? Well, our immune system is there to fight against, it's almost kind of spring cleaning our system, and it's there to fight against any dodgy looking cells, so any cancer cells, any infection, anything like that. But our immune system at this point in time is not concerned with any potential viruses or bacterial infection or cancer. That's kind of longer term. Right now, it is in a pro-inflammatory state. It wants our blood becomes thicker. In case we are bitten, we want to be able to clot easily. Our immune system becomes inflammatory so that we're not really that tasty for him. So we are in a pro-inflammatory state. Our heart is active, so our heart rate goes up. We may feel, pale and clammy and all of those things. So if you ever think of yourself in a state of stress, think back to what is happening in your physiology, okay? So all of this is prepping us to be able to fight him, to run, or to go the step above, where it's just to shut down and freeze, okay? So this is what happens in our stress response. It is mediated by lots of hormones. Cortisol is a big one. Our sympathetic nervous system, so adrenaline and noradrenaline. So these are very active. It's a very active pro-inflammatory state. Okay, so that is our stress cascade. Now, I've only skimmed the surface, and we can go through in detail, but it's a switch. So once that threat signaling center is switched on, bang, there it goes. Now, this guy decides he's not hungry at the moment, and he walks off. So we essentially escape. So then what happens? So the threat is gone. We are out of our stress signal response. So what happens? Well, we breathe a sigh of relief and we switch into our relaxation state. So this is where we kind of start to celebrate. So our relaxation state is switched on. So what is happening in the brain right now? Well, our threat signaling center, our limbic system, our fight, flight, or freeze, is switched off. There is no longer a threat. So then our prefrontal cortex, this area of the brain, gets switched on. And so what happens? Well, it signals that the threat has left, and so we can switch into a relaxation state. So my heart rate starts to reduce. My respiratory rate reduces also. My muscular tension is relaxed. Any unused sugar is reabsorbed. My immune system switches from a pro-inflammatory state to an anti-oxidative state, a protective state. So all of those chemicals and cytokines and pro-inflammatory cells are mopped up, and we start to switch. And what happens to my gut? Well, now it can start digesting. Now it's switched back on. My reproductive system is switched back on. And what is happening to my mind? Well, when stress leaves us, or when the sense of threat leaves, we then have access to our higher emotional states. So we then start to be kind of more open-minded, less negative thinking, less catastrophic. We then may want to start to storytell. So you see, we switch from a stress state into a relaxation state. The branch of the nervous system involved in this is called our parasympathetic, mediated by a nerve called the vagus nerve. So you know, when you take a deep breath in, automatically our muscles relax and everything is in a more relaxed state. And so that buffers our stress response. I hope that makes sense. Now, this just shows it in a more graphical term. So if you follow my cursor, essentially there is a stressor. Your sympathetic nervous system goes up. So that's the fight, flight, freeze. It then comes down once the stressor has gone, and note in blue that your parasympathetic mirrors it. So it's the kind of opposite. They can't both be on at the same time. So as my stress reaction goes up, my relaxation goes down. But then as the stress leaves, as the threat goes, then I have a parasympathetic rebound. And the most important thing is I come back down to my baseline. So I have completed the cycle of stress. So it's all good. And in fact, it's good for me, because then I remember, you know what, I can deal with stress because I go up, but then I come back down, and then I'm back to my baseline. So that next time I'm faced with the same stressor, I'm not in a panic. Now, what happens if it's chronic, if it's too much, or if there is a kind of lots of things going on at the same time? So we start at baseline. We're hit by a stressor, but it is a big stressor. It then starts to come down, but two things may happen if this is longer term. We can't quite hit the baseline. That's number one. So we're always kind of a little bit wired and a little bit in our stress response. Secondly, our relaxation response doesn't come up to buffer it. So this is where we are unable to relax. If we are in a state of wired but tired, if we are in a state of anxiety, if we are overcome by our stressors, or when we don't need too much to set us off. And so you see, we don't get back to baseline. And so then we're left with that extra stress, that extra energy. So if you think about it, we are the only mammalian species that can trigger our stress response through thought alone. So it does not have to be a real tiger or a real lion chasing you. It can be your phone. It can be an email. It can be a relationship dynamic that's affecting you. It can be the pandemic. It can be anything that we are thinking about. Can you imagine? Can have that complete stress cascade. And so if you think of it long term, what happens to our minds? If we're always negative thinking, if we're catastrophic, if we are very closed-minded, well, this is where mental health issues start. So anxiety, depression, OCD, the state of overwhelm, all of that. What happens to our heart if it's always just beating a little bit too fast? If our blood pressure is always just a little bit high? Well, in the short term, it's okay. But long term, this may lead to hypertension and cardiovascular issues. What happens to our lungs? Well, respiratory issues long term. What happens to our muscles, the tension? Well, we can get musculoskeletal problems and injuries. And what happens to our gut when it's, when it's being paused all the time, or if we're too stressed? Well, we can get irritable bowel and any gastrointestinal issues and gut inflammation. And what happens to our reproductive system? Well, it can lead to problems with our periods or our sexual function, or even, issues conceiving. But more importantly, what happens to our immune system long term if it's in a state of pro-inflammation, if it's in a state of stress? Well, our ability to fight infections, our ability to fight cancer, and our ability to notice who is real, which cells are our own and which cells are foreign, and that is a basis of autoimmunity. So you see the stress and where you are in your brain. So whether you are in your prefrontal cortex, where we want to be, or where you are in your limbic system, will determine all of this. So it's really massive. It's huge. So we have two operating systems: prefrontal cortex and our limbic system. And these will dictate what chemicals and neurotransmitters are there. Right. Remember, we are wired for survival. So when you think of your challenges, when you think of your habits, when you think of your thought patterns, when you kind of go back down to the root of these, it's for survival. It's for connection. It's for safety. So sometimes we're worried about stepping into our, out of our comfort zone, and that's because we feel that it may not be safe. So it's worth thinking about, where am I? What am I struggling with right now? And this is my brain trying to protect me. And so there are two kind of brain mechanisms that I'd like to discuss today and just kind of bring your attention to as well, is the reticular activating system. So these are a group of nerve cells, and this really acts as your filter. So this is the lens through which you see everything. So with that attack, with that possible threat, you can then see it through a particular lens. Or, so it could be a very negative experience, it can be a very traumatic experience, or if we see it through a different lens, we can have a completely different experience of it. So your reticular activating system is really your filter, it's your lens, it's where you put, whatever you put your attention, your focus follows. So wherever you put that will grow. So it's almost like if you think about the room you're in right now, are you aware of everything that's there? I often ask some of my patients or some of the participants on my programs, like, how many books do you have behind you? Or what is on your shelf? And they're like, oh, I'm not sure. And that's because your brain just thinks, well, that's not relevant information. Or how many red cars have you seen today? That might not be necessary. But if your reticular activating system is operating through the belief of I am not safe, then you will experience and see the world very, very differently. If we are consuming a lot of negative news, then that will be our focus. So it's useful to start to think, where am I placing my lens? What is my lens? And the other thing is our negativity bias. So we are primed for survival. So remember that. So a negative threat, we will always be scanning for threats. So anything negative will be highlighted, will have more importance. So it will take I think it's 4 to 5 times more positive to outweigh a negative. So imagine, you meet up with a friend, you meet her 10 times, and 9 out of the 10 times it goes amazingly well. But one time you have a bad experience, or one time she says something, and that's what you focus on. Or if you've received feedback, you may have received 90% amazing feedback, but the one time you receive negative feedback, that's what you may focus on. So this is how we are wired. So we have this negativity bias inbuilt in us. So it is just worth knowing that we will feel the negative a lot more. And this is to help us survive, because we want to detect threats. Our limbic system is forever scanning threats. But this depends on how we perceive and how we experience the world. So it's just interesting to know these things, so that we can then sensitize ourselves to the positives a little bit more, and tap into gratitude and all those healing states of mind, so that we can then strengthen this positive, so that the negatives, we will be able to almost see them for what they are and not allow them to consume us. Okay. Now, in terms of how do I do, how can I grow? Where do I start? And I often think, and I often give the analogy of, if I were to ask you, okay, how would you grow a tree? I'm going to give you a seed. What would you do? And think about, okay, what steps and what do I need to do to be able to grow this tree, to be able to allow it to grow and to nurture it? Okay, well then let's think about a tree. I give you a seed. We all have a seed. We all have a brain. What does it need? Well, it needs a fertile soil. So nutrients and hydration, and a fertilized, moist soil. So we plant our seed in this soil. What else do we need? Well, we need to remove any weeds that can encroach on our seed. It needs a nice environment, so the external world around it. And more importantly, if I'm planting a seed, I'm not going to be digging it up every 5 minutes to check on it. So I need to allow it time. I need to be patient with it. But more importantly, when we are growing something, we need to give it attention. We need to nurture it, and we need to be kind to it. So when you think of a tree, or if you plant, or if you garden, or even if, like me, I don't, but you can think about how would I go about it, then think about this seed. But this seed is your brain. So if we extrapolate and we think, okay, well, how can I grow my brain? Well, I need to make sure that the soil is nice and fertile. So what am I feeding it? Now, it's not just our nutrition, although that is extremely important, because we know the brain is fat, essentially. It's primarily made of fat. So we need fat, but I won't go into the nutrition, but essentially we want to optimize our nutrition and our hydration. But what else feeds our brain? Well, it's our senses. So what am I seeing? And it's always worth asking yourself, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? And think about the news. It's all negative. And what am I thinking? Is it gossip? Is it negative? What is going on? So guard your senses. Guard your senses, because they will be feeding your brain. Any toxic beliefs around you, those are your weeds. So let's try and remove those. Let's do some thought work to have a look at what are these toxic weeds that are trying to encroach on this seed that is trying to grow and evolve. I mentioned nutrition and hydration. Well, our seed needs the rest. So sleep is massive. Sleep is a kind of a regenerative, repairing process. So it's when things are are repaired. What is our external environment? So am I getting oxygen? Am I moving my body? So exercise and fresh air. So we know this. But if we start to think about it in terms of our brain's function, because when our brain is operating in our prefrontal cortex, the area where we are our most authentic, the area where we have access to higher emotional states, the area where we are rational thinkers, where we are emotionally stable, where we are flexible, where we have insight, attuned communication, this area. Well, this area flourishes when we focus on the growth of our brain. And when we are in our relaxation response, we are in a prefrontal cortex. So whatever it takes to get you in your relaxation response regularly will grow your brain and will mean that this area becomes more will become easier for you to access, if that makes sense. And more importantly, if we are kind and we pay ourselves kind attention in the process, then that will be a lot easier for us. So structure, our brain is a predictable organ. It loves structure. So if we can structure things as well, then that will help it. So when you think of your brain, think of that seed that is trying to grow. Our seasons will change. It will not always be summer. It will not always be spring, winter, or autumn. So things will change, and different seasons bring with them different challenges. But that's okay, because nothing lasts forever. And so we evolve. And that seed may, you may lose your leaves, but then the spring comes and they blossom again. So it's really just about knowing that about our neuroscience, knowing that we want to be in our prefrontal cortex as much as we can, because then we strengthen the connection between our limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. So we are able to access it a lot easier. Okay, now I always put this up in my courses, and this is essentially asking yourself how charged you feel. So when you think of your phone, if you were to see 5% on your phone and you were about to go on a long journey, you're about to, I was going to say get on a plane, but, for some of us, that's not quite possible. But if you were, and you knew you had 5%, you wouldn't be like, phone, like, what the hell? Like, what do you mean you're on 5%? Come on, charge yourself up. You wouldn't really do that. You wouldn't start questioning your phone and why it's kind of on a low battery. So why do that for yourself? If your phone was on low charge, you would simply find a charger, charge it, allow it to charge, and then end. It would be quite a neutral process, usually. But when it comes to ourselves, we are on a low charge, yet we expect to think the best, to be the best, to feel the best, and there is no leeway. And so ask yourselves, how charged are you? Percentage-wise, like if you were your phone, how charged would you be? And feel free to pop it into the chat if but just literally ask yourself, how charged am I? Right. And so this is a useful exercise to do on a daily basis, just to kind of check in with yourselves and to know where you're at, because that seed can only grow if it has the right environment and the right charge. So it's about knowing, it's about starting to cultivate this awareness of charge, and therefore being compassionate with yourself. So if you're on 5%, then why expect yourself to be able to go at, what is needed from like an 80%? So always ask yourself this, and the energy battery is a really nice exercise to do. So where you have two columns, what charges me and what depletes me, to start to cultivate this awareness. We can then think about our thoughts, our mindset, our lens. So how am I seeing the world? Am I in a state of survival? Or am I in a state of creation? And this pandemic in particular, we all may have experienced a state of grief, a state of survival. So we can't expect ourselves to, be super creative and super enlightened when we are worried about our safety and our survival. So it's about kind of seeing where am I? And what is my mindset? What is necessary and what is added suffering? So when we focus on healing states of mind, such as gratitude and compassion, that automatically puts us in our prefrontal cortex. And when we're in our prefrontal cortex, we have more access to emotional regulation, better decision making, autonomic regulation, so where our bodies are in sync, our gut is less inflamed, our reproductive system is working better, everything. So that initial domino that is set, that cascade that is set in our brain, that initial domino will dictate that whole thing. Positive expectation is an adaptive perspective where we have an expectation for the best. So it's kind of like whatever will be, I will be able to figure it out. Or whatever it will be for the best. And this is also quite an empowering mindset to have. And it's kind of, I would just see if you have access to this, if you've used this before, if you tend to think like this, or whether your mindset, the lens through which you see things, tends to be more negative or more anxiety provoking. And as I mentioned, if we start to shift outside of our victim mindset into our creator mindset, where we are in the driving seat as opposed to in the passenger seat. Now, this is a whole kind of course in itself. I'm just kind of picking out the main bits, but it's really about where am I functioning from in my brain? Am I in my limbic system, fight, flight, freeze? Or am I in my prefrontal cortex, which is my self-regulating center, my creator mindset? And I think in particular for the pandemic, and in particular for the times we find ourselves in now, it's really useful to think about, what do I know for sure? What do I know that is 100% certain? So what do we know? Well, we only have this moment. We've only ever had this moment. There's no tomorrow. Yesterday has gone. And actually, we just have right now. So when I'm looking into the future and predicting negative outcomes, and my thoughts are spiraling and I just can't switch off, or I'm in overwhelm, or when it's just too much, I'm in the future. When I am ruminating, when I'm going past experiences and I'm just going round and round, I'm in the past. So if I'm not in the past and I'm not in the future, or sorry, if I'm in the past or I'm in the future, then I'm not in the present. But that's all I actually have. So when we are able to bring ourselves back to right now, what is actually happening right now? We used to think we had certainty, but that was an illusion. It's just nowadays, it's kind of hit us right here. And so we've never really had certainty. Nothing in life has ever been certain, but our perception of it has been there. So really, this whole concept of uncertainty has just been brought into our attention because of what's been happening. And just remember that the lens through which you see things will dictate how you see things. It will dictate your experience of the world and of your life and everything. So let's start to think about how we see things and what our lens is. And I put this, and it's not to be kind of, flippant in any way, but our suffering, some of it, most of it, is actually optional, because it's our thoughts that about something that generate the suffering. So we can have pain from life and what it throws at us, but there's an extra layer in terms of our perception of it, how we see it through our reticular activating system, how we are using our negativity bias, that then puts that added layer on. So if we are able to filter through, get back down to, right, this is my pain. I cannot change this. This is what is happening. But I can start to look at all the extra stuff in order to then reduce my suffering. So by knowing my brain, I can use it to my advantage. I can really start to leverage and to reduce it. Anybody can. Anybody can. And, you know, we are not alone. We all experience all emotions, for anxiety and depression and sadness and overwhelm and, you know, all of those things. You are not alone. And you are feeling like this because at some point it was protective. And at some point there was a connection in terms of this is for your survival. This is to keep you safe, even though it's super painful. So it's okay. What I'm trying to say is it's okay. But by learning little tiny bits, we can start to shift things bit by bit. And I love this quote: the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. So let's start to kind of move back and start to think, okay, where am I at in my brain? And where can I start to make the tweaks? Where can I start to reduce the noise, to unstick myself, to reduce this overwhelm, and to access my prefrontal cortex a little bit more often? Now I'm going to see if we have time for meditation at the end, but I'll go through everything first, and then we'll see if we can get to a meditation at the end. So the meditation in particular, but this is really in terms of any relaxation strategy. What we are aiming to do, and I love this diagram, is just to get this noise, you know, just to get these curls and straighten them. So it's really about allowing our brain to mold to our experiences in a way that serves us. So we now know that the brain is plastic, it's malleable, it can be shaped. So old patterns can be rewired. When we access our relaxation strategies, meditation in particular, mindfulness in particular, we can then start to rewire the brain. It makes that process much easier. Obviously, it makes us feel better and more relaxed. And so it reduces all of, you know, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our respiratory rate, our muscle tension, all of those things. It will buffer our stress. But we also know it grows our brain. It grows our gray matter in an area called the hippocampus. So our memory improves, our focus improves. We experience more positive emotions and emotional stability. So we don't really need to touch the stress stuff. By improving our ability to relax, and when I'm talking relax, I'm not talking necessarily bubble baths and chilling, you know, and massages and spas. I'm talking what is my brain when it's relaxed? How can I access my relaxation response, my parasympathetic, my vagus nerve? Because when I do that, I automatically buffer the stress. I automatically reduce the negative effects of stress, because remember, it's a seesaw. You're either up or down. It's a seesaw by yourself. So when my relaxation strategies and my relaxation response is strengthened, then my stress automatically goes down. So it's a really good shortcut to reduce this stress. Okay. So the Harvard Stress Management and Resiliency Training roadmap is basically based on 3 principles. So if you are approaching your stress management, then I would say, number 1, look at awareness. Start with your awareness. So as a curious detective, so no judgment, no shame, no guilt, no negativity, just have a look at the different areas of your life. So start to look, okay, my behaviors, my habits, my physical body, my physical state, my energy levels, how charged am I most of the time, my emotional state, my thoughts, How do I relate to myself? How do I relate to others? How do I relate to the world around me? So just start by taking an inventory, an audit of yourself, okay? No judgment, no need for overwhelm. We're just having a look. Number 2, how can I strengthen my relaxation response? How can I make it so strong that my stress response is automatically buffered? So these are the meditative practices, mindfulness, movement, exercise, you know, all of these things. It's a massive, massive thing. But how can I inject a few of these into my day? Just a tiny little bit, because that tiny little bit will start to buffer a little bit. Finally, so we've gone through awareness, gone through relaxation. Finally, my adaptive strategies. So what have I been using? What strategies have I been using in the past? Have they been useful? Have they served me? And if not, how can I start to shift? How can I start to develop a more positive perspective? How can I incorporate better behaviors in my life? How can I reappraise? How can I see coping differently? And obviously, social connections. So all of these things, all of these pillars essentially will buffer our stress response. So when we have less stress, then we start to think clearer, which will then have a knock-on effect. It will then promote our relaxation response even more. And so it will lead us to resilience, to greater resilience, which is a kind of like our bounce back potential. And so from an immunological point of view, we see that we have less inflammation, increased antioxidation, and obviously wellness and well-being in all of its different dimensions. So it's a really nice roadmap to have a look at these different areas, but we start number 1 with awareness. Right, okay. And I love this by James Clear. So if you haven't read his book, he wrote Atomic Habits, and he looks at 1%. So I want you just to kind of reflect and think, what have I learned today? And if you're going through something really difficult, think about it and think, okay, has there been any good, like a little tiny, tiny, tiny good thing that's come out of it, or any situation for that matter? And then ask yourself, okay, if I'm just kind of looking at awareness, is there anything tiny that I could do differently from now? Can I think differently? We don't question our feelings, we validate them. But it's our thoughts that we don't necessarily, that we don't need to feel threatened by. And so if we aim for 1% a day, over time, that compounds, and we are so much better off after several months or a year or 6 months or even a week. So it's really about tiny, tiny, tiny changes that over time will be massive. I will often say, with this pandemic, it's like you can't see your hair growing. You don't really say, oh, you don't wake up and think, oh, okay, you've grown by, 0.2 of a millimeter. You don't see your hair growing, but all of a sudden, if applicable, all of a sudden you wake up and you think, wow, I need a haircut. Where's that come from? So it's the same with our habits and how we live our life. It's really the tiny, tiny things. So just go one step at a time, one deep breath at a time, one journal entry at a time, one word at a time, one glass of water at a time. So be kind, remember that seed, and remember what we are trying to grow. Now, I'm just going to check on time, and if I'm very happy to take questions. You can reach out to me at rqwellness.com. My Instagram is there, and we have time for questions right now. And if there are no questions, then we can essentially end with a little recap and meditation. So I will give you guys a little bit of time to let me know if you have any questions. And otherwise, I suggest we can have a small, or go through a little small meditation if you're up for it. Okay, fantastic. So with today's session, if we think about our brain and we want to try to access our prefrontal cortex, then one way is through gratitude. And when I talk about gratitude, some of it can be, and it's not, oh, I should be feeling like this, or I really should be grateful for this. I should be thinking more positive, and I should. That's not gratitude. That is a distorted way of thinking. You're placing an expectation, you're kind of telling yourself off, and that will put us in a stress state. So if we start now to think about, right, how can I shift? I invite you to join me on a very short meditation that I will guide. And so I invite you just to get comfy and remove any distractions and just come into a comfortable position. And we just want to just see. And this could be kind of, we just want to take an inventory of ourselves and where we are right now. So when you're ready, you can close your eyes and just start by taking a nice deep breath in and out. And allow your breath to start to guide you. Now, it is okay if thoughts are whizzing past you. That's fine. Just let them bounce back off you. Close your eyes and allow the breath to come over you like a wave. So allow it to be restful. Allow it to be effortless. And be curious with it. We have no expectations. Just bring yourself to this present moment. Relax your shoulders. Allow them to go heavy. Iron out any muscular tension you may feel. Relax your eyelids. Allow your eyes to feel deep in their sockets. Relax your forehead and your facial muscles. And relax your jaw. You can even bring a smile to your face. And just allow your whole body to sink in to your seat. And when you are ready, I would like you to bring to the forefront of your mind an image, a landscape, a person, someone, something that you love dearly, that always brings you joy. It could be a pet. It could be a moment in your life when you felt completely free, but just a moment where you feel connected, you feel at ease, in a joyful state. So when you have this moment, bring it to the forefront of your mind. Experience it as if you were there. If it's a person, a pet, a thing, visualize it, see it as if it were in front of you. What does it look like? What colors does it have? Allow your breath to sink deeper and deeper. And if you could package this emotion into a color, what would it be? What color does this experience have? And now imagine you're inhaling, you're filling your cells with this color, the color of joy, freedom, connection. And with every breath, all of your cells are filling up with this color. And as you exhale, you're exhaling any toxicity, any of those weeds that you want to get rid of so that your seed can blossom and grow. And you can come back to this image anytime you like. So allow each cell to fill up with this emotion, to fill up with this color, until you are bright, until it is radiating from every pore. And know that you are probably in your prefrontal cortex. By being grateful for this image, by experiencing it again, we are automatically buffering our stress. So a few more deep breaths as we end this short meditation. And it's totally fine if thoughts have come in and out, just let them be. It's part of the experience. And bring a smile to your face. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I hope that was useful. By experiencing a little gratitude and a little relaxation response, we can tap into our prefrontal cortex more often during the day. So have a think, have a look at your life, and pick one little place where you can make 1% change, 1% improvement, and over time, it will shift significantly. If you need any help, do not hesitate to ask, but remember your seed, remember your brain, and guard your senses. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Happiness Planner. I love your stuff. And I hope to see you all soon, and stay well. And remember, tiny, tiny little bits at a time. Happy gardening. Lots of love and all my best. Stay safe, and bye-bye.